is Apex, represented by Ian Vincent, and Business North, represented by Ryan Richaud. Development Association, represented by Michelle Hospital. Please stand and be recognized. If you are a student, participant, faculty, part of the committee, the steering committee, or on staff, National Bank of Commerce, or on the board of National Bank of Commerce, I'd like to thank you for all your efforts in helping to make this possible. Please stand. Just a little reminder, Election Day is 1 week from today. Please get out and vote. At this time, I'd like to introduce Mr. Bruce Thompson, National Bank of Commerce, as our MC for today. Happy birthday, Bruce.
Good morning, and thank you for coming. We think this is going to be great information for all of you to help plan your futures. I think it's really funny that on a day when I get 1 year closer to the twilight zone that we're talking about aging demographics. Isn't that cool? Anyways, I know what you're all thinking. He can't possibly be 40. You're right. You're right. Before we get started, I'd like to recognize a couple of people that are not in the room, but were instrumental in getting the steering committee started. Jim Skurla from UMD and Julianne Raymond from UWS, both retired. Of course, you know what they say about retirement. I'm just too busy, you know. Actually, Julianne she's just a few days from retirement, but she had a critical mission back at UWS to finish up the end. So, but they were integral in getting this started. And from the UMD standpoint, we have Monica Haynes, who has replaced Jim Skurla on our steering committee. So let's give Monica a hand. I call your attention to representatives from Career Services at UMD, UWS, and College of St. Scholastica, who are here and look forward to discussing how they might partner with your organization. Partnering could include helping find qualified candidates for internships or jobs through campus job fairs, on-campus recruiting, and the free listing of your jobs and internships. Could include consulting with you to help develop internship programs, and could also connect you with faculty. There are also representatives from North Force here, so the table's in the back. Please take some time as you conclude today to talk to them. Because as you'll learn in our presentation today, it's going to be very important to find the right people and find out where they are, and I think working with our university is a great example, an opportunity to do that. Our first presenters today are Matthew Arthur and Eric Ritdahl from the Bureau of Business and Economic Research, Labovitz School of Business and Economics, UMD. The students will be presenting in sequence, and I will call for applause at the conclusion of all the presentations. So, please welcome Matthew Arthur and Eric Ritdahl.
Well, hello everyone. Good morning and thank you for being here. My name is Matt. This is Eric. We are undergraduate research assistants from the Bureau of Business and Economic Research at UMD. Today we're presenting some research we've been working on concerning population and age distribution in the REIF region. So for those of you unfamiliar, this is the 15-county REIF region. It's a collection of 15 counties in northeastern Minnesota and northwest Wisconsin. The counties are in Minnesota: Cook, Lake, St. Louis, Koochiching, Itasca, Carlton, Aiken, and Pine. And in Wisconsin, Douglas, Burnett, Iron, Sawyer, Bayfield, Ashland, and Washburn. So to start out, we'd like to present some of the information on just population. And in general, population has remained relatively stable in the REIF region. Since 2007, the Minnesota REIF region has experienced a net gain of 515 people, while the Wisconsin region has experienced a net loss of 1,108. This is not very big. It's a net loss of about 600 people for the entire region, which is only about 0.1%. Now this chart shows projections for the population in the REIF region out to 2040. And judging from the chart, it appears that the trend of stable population change is expected to relatively continue over the next 30 years or so. The population is expected to peak in about 2030 and gradually decline after that.
So here we have another look at the REIF region. This map was created using a special GIS software to visually display the percent of the population over the age of 65 by county. So we have selected, as you can see in the bottom left-hand corner, our legend. We have selected 5 colors, and each color represents a different specific percentage range. Generally speaking, the darker the color, the higher the percentage is going to be. And so as you can see, 35% dark blue, all the way down to 20% and below for our yellow. And so for the next 7 slides, we're going to see the projected percent age of the population over the age of 65 for the next 25 years. And because it's still fairly dark out and early, we'll give you a few moments to analyze each one. And so as you can see, as soon as 2020, Aiken County is projected to have close to 36% of its population be of the age 65 and older. It becomes the first county in the REIF region to reach this mark, being closely followed behind by Cook, Bayfield, and Iron. And so by the year 2035, we project that 13 of the 15 REIF counties will be at least have reached the 30% mark, with 5 of those 13 reaching the 35% mark, and a further 2 of those 13 even reaching the 40% mark, meaning 40% of their population will be at least of the age of 65 and older, with Bayfield topping out at an astonishing 43%. Also of note, you can notice here, Douglas and Carleton counties are still relatively low. The Douglas and County are the only 2 counties that will remain under the 30% mark. Also of note, Cook County is projected to see one of the most dramatic and sustained increases of any of the REIF counties. Its percent population is expected to double over the next 25 years from around 20% to over 40%. On the other end of the spectrum is Douglas County. There, the percent population is only expected to increase by about 8% over the next 25. Also of note, if you can notice here, Aiken, Lake, and Pine counties actually show a reduction between the years 2035 and 2040. The Minnesota REIF region on average is projected to see a slight reduction in its aging population during this time frame, while the Wisconsin REIF region is projected to continue increasing slightly. Based on our data, we expect the aging population trends to reach their peak in this 5-year window. And now on to St. Louis County specifically. So as you can see, we've split it up into 2 groups, the labor force being of the ages 25 to 64, and then 65 plus. And so in 2015, the difference between these 2 age groups will be approximately 62,000 people. By the year 2035, and consistent with our data, This gap will be reduced to approximately 22,000, and that's the smallest one over the course of these projections, and also a 65% reduction from 2015. By the year 2045, this gap will then increase slightly to 24,000, which, according to our data, enforces our hypothesis that 2035 will kind of be the peak of the aging demographics.
So at this point, I'd like to take a moment to look at the total labor force participation for the years 1990 through 2013. So this chart shows the total labor force participation over the past 20 years, and one interesting observation here is that the labor force participation isn't declining a lot in light of the 2008 recession, which could mean that workers were not discouraged as much as we had thought. It's an interesting trend, but we can see that around 2010, the labor force participation is expected to begin to decline a bit, and according to our research, the decline is likely to continue over the next 20 years. And so we'd like to take a moment to comment on the implications of the demographic trends to finish up our presentation today. Nearly all of the projected increase in population over the next 20 years will be due to increases in the population over 65. These increases, accompanied by the decrease in persons aged 25 to 64, projects a large shift in the population distribution for our region. In some counties, as Eric mentioned, the proportion of persons aged 65 and over is expected to climb to 40% or more by 2040. And with an increase in the proportion of population over 65, we'll see an increase in the proportion of retired persons and a decrease in the labor force. A decrease in the proportion of the working population will further push down the labor force, which could have many implications related to unemployment and the supply and demand for labor. And that concludes our presentation for today. I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Elliot from UWS, who will be talking about consumer confidence indicators.
Hello everyone, my name is Elliot Charette, and today I'll be presenting on consumer confidence indicators in our 15-county REIF region. So to begin, I need to lay some groundwork about what our research attempts to do, and that requires understanding business cycle forecasting. So to start off, we have a coincident indicator, and what a coincident indicator is it tracks how our economy is doing in real time. And we can measure that by the change in the percentage in real GDP. And what this indicator allows us to do is attempt to see when the economy is contracting and eventually reaching a trough, which is a low point of an economic cycle, and also when the economy is expanding and eventually approaching a peak, which is the top of a boom of an economic cycle. But there's a problem with using only coincident indicators, and that is that it takes time to gather data, and it also takes time to interpret that data. So economists have also created leading indicators. And what this indicator does is it allows us to predict future economic conditions by measuring the change in consumer expectations. So if consumers are overly optimistic, we can generally expect economic expansion. Finally, there are lagging indicators as well. And what a lagging indicator does is it affirms the economic condition that we're in. So if a coincident indicator tells us that the economy is contracting, and then a lagging indicator also suggests that, then we can be more certain that we are in a recession, just as an example. So now I'm going to focus on the indicators that our college studied. And the first is the index of consumer sentiment. Now what this indicator does is it provides an overall picture from a consumer perspective on personal finances, business conditions, and consumption spending. And this is one of the more important indicators because with this one we can project consumer spending behavior and in turn retail sales. The next indicator is the index of current conditions, which basically serves as our coincident indicator. So it helps us discern the current state of the economy. And then the index of consumer expectations, and this is our leading indicator, and this allows us to project future economic and financial conditions. Before I get into the research that our college did, I want to talk a bit about our method. We use the 3D approach, and it's a similar approach that the University of Michigan does. And what the 3D approach means is that we need to have depth, which means a change in any of the indices of 3% or more, whether that be a positive change or a negative change. We also need duration, so an indicator needs to be moving in the same direction for 3 or 4 months or more. So if an indicator is going in positive direction for 4 months, we can probably take that as the economy expanding. And dimension, so all the indicators need to point in the same direction. So this is some research from the University of Michigan, and this is on the National Index of Consumer Sentiment. And this provides a national perspective on how the economy is doing. And if we look at the bar graph, there doesn't seem to be any clear trend. And if we also look at the last 6 months, there seems to be more positive gains than negative gains. So what this suggests is that consumers are hesitant and cautious, but that there is somewhat of a rising economy currently. And the same idea is here for the National Index of Current Conditions. There doesn't seem to be any clear discernible pattern, but the last 6 months seem to have some positive gains as well. And finally, the National Index of Consumer Expectations. It's a bit more exaggerated than the last 2 graphs. And going from month to month, it's sporadic as well, but April and September have some pretty large gains there, which suggests that consumers are expecting the economy to get better. So overall, what these indices tell us is that consumers are hesitant about the current economic conditions, and that the economy is slowly growing, and that consumers expect that to continue into the future. So now getting into the research that we conducted for the region, the phone survey results are shown there. This year we actually have 2 pools of surveys. We have the phone surveys, which are shown, and then we also have email surveys. And the email surveys aren't shown because they are statistically significantly different, which means that we can't actually pull together the results. And if we look at each indicator, we can observe that each one is posting positive changes, and that for the duration, it's been over a year, and the indices are posting in the same direction for rising optimism. So from that, we can say that the economy in the short run is expanding. The index of consumer conditions, or of current conditions, also suggests that our economy is strengthening, and the index of consumer expectations posted a bit larger gains than the other indices, and that means that the expectations are that the economy is going to continually expand into the future. And finally, because the theme of our research this year was an aging population, we asked respondents whether they believe that the aging population was going to present more problems or benefits for our region. And 2 survey results are shown there. The phone surveys are the orangish color, and that seems to be evenly distributed. And the email results, email respondents believe that the aging population is going to present more problems for our region. So that's all the research that I have about consumer confidence indicators. And Ethan Kessler will now take over and talk about the market performance of our region.
Good morning, everyone. I'm here to tell you about the second report of an ongoing research project that tracks the equity performance of 12 companies located within the 15 counties surrounding the Twin Ports. For this project, an index of local stocks of interest was created, measures of future performance were examined, and comparison to industry averages and market indices were analyzed. The first report covered the performance of the index in individual stocks that make up the index over a 5-year period from January 2nd, 2009 to December 31st, 2013. The second report extends the study through September 30th, 2014. The initial criteria for inclusion in the Regional Equity Index, or the REI, required that the stock be publicly traded with the firm's headquarters located within the 15-county area of study. Unfortunately, only Elite and Iconics met that requirement. To increase the size of the index, the criteria were relaxed to include firms that have a significant presence in our region. This table shows the yearly returns of each company within the index, including the average of the index and the benchmark that we compared it to. Although the index showed a small positive return of 3.65% year to date, the overall performance of the index is above average when compared to the benchmark of 2.95%. Contributing to the lackluster performance of the index and the benchmark was the market correction during the last month of our study period. When comparing the growth of a $100 investment in the REI to the S&P 400 over the holding period, the trend for the REI closely mirrors and slightly outperforms the market. The ending value of the investment in the REI is $239.43, while the ending value of the S&P 400 is $209.12. The timeliness rank provides a measure of predicted stock price performance relative to the market over the next year. The highest possible rank is 1 and the lowest is 5. The average timeliness rank for the REI is slightly above average at 2.7. This suggests that on average the price performance of the REI should do slightly better than the market over the next year. The safety rank measures the potential risk of an individual stock. The highest possible safety rank is 1 and the lowest is 5. The safety rank of the REI is 3, which indicates that the REI is average in terms of potential risk. The technical rank provides an estimation of stock price performance relative to the market over the next 3 to 6 months. The average technical rank for the REI is 2.6, indicating that the index is expected to have a slightly better performance than the market over the next 3 to 6 months. Stock price stability measures the weekly volatility of a stock price relative to the stock's volatility over the last 5 years. The ranks range from 100, the most stable, to 5, the least. The average price stability for the REI is 45.0, which is slightly below the average. Price growth persistence is a measure of the historical stock growth trend of an individual stock relative to the price growth trend of the market. Again, the ratings range from 100, the highest, to 5, the lowest. The price growth persistence for the REI is 44.1, indicating it is slightly below average in terms of consistent price growth. Price ratios are often used to measure investors' expectations of future stock price performance. They are typically compared to the industry average. The average price to earnings ratio is 20 to 25 times earnings. The PE ratio for the REI is 62.03. This is quite high when compared to the average market ratio. However, the extremely high PE ratio of the Louisiana Pacific skewed the results. If it is excluded from the calculation, the average PE ratio is 21.6. The forward price to earnings measure is a way to compare current earnings to estimated future earnings. If earnings are expected to grow, the future PE ratio will be lower than the current PE ratio. For the 6 companies that had data on Morningstar, all of them showed a lower future ratio than current, indicating their earnings are expected to grow. The PEG ratio is considered a better measure of expected price performance than the PE ratio because it considers growth. A general rule of thumb is that a PEG ratio less than 1 is considered desirable. A ratio equal to 1 indicates the stock is fairly priced. Greater than 1 says the stock is overvalued, while less than 1 says the stock is undervalued. The PEG payback period is the amount of time it would take an investor to double their money in an investment. The longer the PEG payback period, the riskier their investment. Short interest is an indicator of investor sentiment of the market for a specific stock. A large change in a stock's short interest from month to month can be a very telling indicator. If short interest increases, it means there are more investors who believe the stock price will decline. 9 of the firms in the REI have a short interest ratios ranging from 5.32 to 25.65, indicating investors are not very confident that stock prices will increase over the short term. Only 3 of the firms in the REI have ratios below 5, indicating that investors are bullish on these stocks. The average short ratio for the REI is 8.25, indicating a bearish sentiment by investors. In conclusion, although the REI showed a small positive return with 3.65% year to date, the overall performance of the index is slightly above average when compared to the benchmark return of 2.95%. The large negative returns, which had a strong influence on the overall performance of the index, were offset by strong performances by Canadian National Railway, Enbridge, Sappi Limited, and U.S. Steel. The stock valuations were significantly impacted by the large market decline during the last month of our study period. The value line measures indicate the index is very consistent and comparable to the market for most stocks and most measures. There does appear to be a decline in the safety rank for some of our stocks, indicating a slightly higher level of risk. Overall, it appears that investors' expectations of future performance of the stocks in the REI are mixed. Our next presenter is Sam Hoffman from St. Scholastica.
All right, so as was said, the College of St. Scholastica's role in this forum is assessing the region's business confidence, and we have encouraging news to report on that front. The business confidence index that we created registered a reading of 110, where any reading above 100 indicates confidence. This is just about in line with last year's reading of 111, which indicates that confidence in the region is strong and relatively stable. Now, before we can walk through the results of the survey, we need to know what the businesses whose confidence we're assessing look like. The majority of them come from businesses with less than 20 employees, well over 3/4 have less than 100. Over 60% come from the industries listed on the slide. The report available to you this morning features an in-depth analysis of each of these industries, as well as 3 size breakdowns. I'll very briefly touch on those findings later, but my main focus right now is just going to be on how the region as a whole is doing. So let's start things out by looking at how businesses fared on a relatively general level. We asked respondents how the outlook for their company, the blue bars, and their evaluation of general business activity, the green ones, had changed in the 6 months leading up to our survey. We can see that roughly 46% of respondents saw some sort of increase in company outlook, and 52% saw one in their level of general business activity. These results were better than expected, as less than 40% of businesses had expected increases in these questions at the time of the last forum. Now, when looking ahead for projections for the next 6 months, we see slight improvements across the board for both of these indicators. The proportion of businesses expecting to decline is now under 15% for both questions. Well over half of all respondents are expecting company outlook and general business activity to improve. That business confidence is strong and looks poised for further improvement is a relatively easy conclusion to draw based on this data. So now that we have a basic understanding of general confidence in hand, let's turn our attention now to more specific indicators. When respondents were asked what had happened to their average hours worked, number of employees, capital expenditures, selling prices, sales revenue, and profits over the previous 6 months, we see that general confidence translated into specific business action. Each indicator was increased in over 30% of all businesses, with capital expenditures, sales revenue, and profits experiencing the most robust gains. However, revenue and profit also decreased in more businesses than any other indicator. Selling prices were in line with expectations, while number of employees, capital expenditures, and a number of employees, sorry, did I say that? The capital expenditures all exceeded them. Now moving on to projections for the next 6 months. If you remember a few slides back, the general indicators were expected to improve in over 50% of businesses, while the specific indicators are expected to stay the same at about that same proportion here. Well, that contradiction might be cause for some concern. The overall direction here is still a positive one. The proportion expecting declines is modest and mostly consistent across all variables, while at least 25% of respondents expect increases in every indicator. It's also worth noting that following a strong 6-month period, capital expenditures are expected to continue to rise moderately in 30% of businesses and significantly in another 7%, with only 7% total expecting to decline. This might suggest that businesses are confident not only in themselves, but in the regional economic landscape as a whole. So it's safe to say that the region's confidence is strong and that there is optimism, albeit muted optimism, for further growth and improvement in the near future. Of course, this doesn't mean that there aren't problem areas. When businesses were asked to choose up to 3 factors limiting business activity, we see that insufficient demand and competition within the sector led the way, each getting a third of businesses to choose them. Government policy, shortage of skilled labor, and cost of labor all were selected by more than 20% and rounded out the top 5. Concerns of shortage in skilled labor and cost of labor rose significantly compared to the last survey, while concerns over weather conditions were more than halved. As I mentioned, our section in the report includes size and industry analysis, and I'd like to very briefly give you a snapshot of those findings. Leisure and hospitality was by far the most confident of the industries analyzed, while financial and professional services tracked closely along with the relatively strong confidence of the rest of the region. Confidence for nonprofits and health services was mostly mixed and tended to be neutral on average, while the education industry was the least confident and had some concerning trends. As for size, businesses in our middle tier, which we defined as those with between 100 and 249 employees, experienced more robust gains in confidence than their smaller and bigger counterparts. Finally, I'd like to conclude this presentation by keeping with the theme of this morning's keynote presentation. We asked firms how to evaluate one of the major demographic trends occurring across the country, the increasing percentage of those aged 65 and older, how that will affect their level of general business activity. As you can see, the majority of businesses didn't expect any impact, while 28% thought there would be an increase and 11% thought it would result in a decrease. A similar story emerges when respondents were asked about demand for skilled labor and productivity and how those would be impacted. It's worth noting that demand for skilled labor is expected to increase in approximately 40% of businesses alone due to this issue, and that a lack of skilled labor was already listed as one of the major factors limiting business activity in the region. So combating this issue seems like it should be one of the top priorities for businesses and chambers in the area if they want to sustain and build upon the relatively strong confidence that I hope I've done a good job of conveying to you here this morning. Thank you.
Good news, let's give all of our presenters a hand. We have a very special phone number I'd like to call your attention to. I have a very special phone, and I will be receiving text questions from you from our professional presenters today. So if you would, during the presentations, if something occurs to you, please give us a question via that phone number on your iPhone or other device, and we'll make sure that we'll get to as many as possible as time allows towards the end. Again, that number 218-721-8318. At this time, I would like to introduce David Egan Robertson, who is an applied demographer with the UW-Madison Applied Population Laboratory. He joined the APL in January of 2012 after serving as the demographer for the State of Wisconsin Demographic Services Center for 11 years. He specializes in population and household estimates and projections. In addition, he provides consultation on census data with particular knowledge of historical census results for Wisconsin municipalities and counties. Please welcome David Egan Robertson.
All right, good morning, everyone. My focus, as is the topic of the day, is on the aging of the population. I'll talk particularly about the 7 counties in Wisconsin, and then Andy Egbert, who will follow, will talk in more detail about the Minnesota side. And before I delve into the numbers and the graphs and the maps, you've seen a lot already, and maybe you're already kind of overloaded with data, but we'll bring you more. I want to just dwell for a minute on how the discussion about aging is being framed. let's see. If I get in sync here. As mentioned, I work at the UW-Madison in the Applied Population Lab. It's been around since the late 60s. And we're recently renovating our offices, and we have this room which I call the room of requirement. Those of you who've read Harry Potter can get the image. We politely call it our library. And I came across this report. And if you can see that, I don't know how well you can see, this was a report on the aging population of the US and Wisconsin. In the upper right, the date is 1963. As a reality check at that time, Wisconsin's population age 65 and over was just above 10%. And just sort of the way, I mean, it's sort of tell by the way this drawing is done, everybody looks pretty somber. And that really is sort of the way the report reads. And so there's this long history of sort of, is the aging process, you know, a concern, a problem? I think one of the students mentioned they sort of asked that question in either the telephone survey or another survey method. So again, and so the elderly population is a little over 10%, now it's close to 14% and going higher. Another way that the aging population is framed is that it's impending doom. This is a report from Wisconsin Taxpayers Alliance based in Madison, which made use of the projections I prepared for the state and complete with lightning bolts and storm clouds. Or is the future one of opportunity? Certainly Del Webb communities and other large builders of retirement communities must be thinking this is a time of opportunity for us. So my effort here is not to cast judgment in any way, hopefully, about this process. It's an inevitable process that's hitting us, the United States, the developed countries of the world. But just to provide some observation on the recent history and future trends. So just going, why do I project forward 30 years in the future? So I always kind of like to go back 30 years. Maybe it's because I'm older and I was there. But to get more of a sense of those, sort of, demography and the process of population change is a very long, slow process. So, and some of this has been alluded to a little bit by previous speakers. And to get a sense, again, of the scale of the Wisconsin counties in the area and then the Minnesota counties in the area. The lower bar here, this shows the Wisconsin population, which has remained relatively consistent as a group across the last 30 plus years. Minnesota had a bit more of a dip in the 80s, about an 8% loss, then rose about 5% in the 90s and about 2% in the 2000s. So it's about a 3-to-1 ratio in terms of population, just straight population size. And you can see the overall area has fluctuated between 450 and 500,000 for the last 30 years. Just looking specifically now at the counties on the Wisconsin side, the blue bars here, those are sort of the fence posts, those are the census counts. And the wires are running across the top. Those are the annual estimates that come out of Wisconsin's Demographic Services Unit. And you can see, just looking at the 7 counties in Wisconsin, it was relatively flat in the 80s, quite solid, steady gain in the 90s, and then it did level off again and has still been holding level even now through 2014. So another view of where we've been is to look at the major components of population change. Components of change are sort of the big ticket items that demographers look at when they're studying population shifts. So natural increase is the difference between births and deaths. For the 1980s, in the 7 counties, births exceeded deaths. But for the last 2 decades, the situation has reversed. They're both less than 1,000 in the last 2 decades. But in the 7-county area, for now probably approaching 25 years, there are more deaths occurring than births occurring. Net migration is the difference in the counts of people moving into an area minus those who move out. There's been a wide variation in this figure, and this is the hardest component to project. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But again, you can see there's been a lot of wide variation. There was some loss in the 80s with the population growth in the 90s. In-migration was strong. And then in the 2000s, it was a very small net out-migration at that time. Let's see, just looking more specifically at births and deaths, those two pieces that make up the natural increase. In the 1980s, it's a little bit light, but you can sort of get the idea. Births were highest in the 1980s, and they fell about 16%, or 3,000, from the 1980s to the 1990s. And again, they slipped a little bit through the decade of 2000 to 2010. Deaths, as you can see, were lower in the 80s, and that's what produced that natural increase during that period. But then the two lines crossed over at some point during the 90s, so we have a situation of natural decrease over the last 2 decades. Wanted to just do a slide, sort of where are we now, and just give people a sense of the 7 counties in the area. It's quite interesting. 5 of them are remarkably close in population size. I always kind of lose track of this until I work on the estimates or projections. Say, boy, these counties are very similar in size. 5 of the counties are basically between 15 and 17,000 people. Douglas is the largest county, with Superior making up about 60% of the population of Douglas County. And Iron is much smaller, only about 6,000 people. So let's see, again, just sort of sticking with the 7 county area as a whole, and sort of moving now into the topic of the day. This is a chart showing population just by very broad age groups at the 2010 census, comparing the REIF region with the state of Wisconsin in this case. And you can see the bars are higher for 45 to 64 and 65 to 84 by quite a bit for the 7 county area. And in fact, when you look at the median age, which is kind of a convenient 1-number summary of how the age of a population is in a particular area, in the REIF area it's 45, or was at 2010, and that's actually 6.5 years older than the state of Wisconsin average. And it's been touched on a little bit by some of the students, but again, if we look at each county, and I've done these little pie charts here, so again, I'm relying on where we sort of are right now at 2010. Douglas and Ashland County both have the lowest percent of 65 plus, and the age distribution is influenced in these 2 counties. Well, yeah, in these 2 counties, there is a college in Ashland, Northland, and so it's somewhat influenced by a greater proportion of students, so that makes your proportion of age 65 and older smaller. There's also American Indian Reservation in Ashland that has some influence there. So those are both, 14 to 16% age 65 and over. And then 5 counties are all at or above 21%. If you remember, I mentioned the statewide average in Wisconsin is 14%. So these 5 counties have like 1.5 times the share of elderly that the state does as a whole. And Iron County comes in at the highest at 25%. So one last slide here. I should have probably put this a little bit early in their order, but I spoke earlier about natural increase and net migration being the 2 big ticket items of population change. Net migration can also be broken down by age as an indicator of past trends and future migration flows. So I looked at the 7 counties in the area. I noticed a pretty distinct pattern when I started breaking apart their net migration by age. This line is for Douglas County, and hopefully you can see fairly well that there's a peak, age 15 to 19 when people are coming to UW Superior. And then there's a decline during the 20s. Certainly those people who were here as students 10 years before have migrated away. And basically, I don't know, for ages beyond that, it's kind of hovering right around 0. The other 6 counties have a very distinctly different pattern. While in-migration for young children is about the same, you have this big outflow in those other 6 counties of 15 and 19-year-olds and 20 and 24-year-olds, leaving to go to college elsewhere, basically, is a good indicator, or going for work elsewhere. But you do get a rebound, even in some of the young adult ages, to those 6 counties. And then there's a real increase, as you can see, in sort of the young, what we call young retirees, sort of age 55 and on, up through 69 or 70, and then there is a little bit of net out-migration beyond 75. So the region has just these 2 sort of distinct patterns, and when we do projections, we sort of maintain these patterns. What we found in our research is that over decades, and we have done research now back through the 50s and 60s by county, is these lines sort of stay the same, but they just sort of move up and down. So during times of greater in-migration, these lines kind of move up, and when there's lower migration or actual out-migration, the lines actually lower. So let's go on to the future. Now again, a lot of it comes down to framing. Those of us who are still waiting for our Jetsons aero cars, but this is an example, right? Future as opportunity. This is a positive spin on the future, a bit tongue-in-cheek, but anyway. But as the future has gotten closer, things have gotten a little darker. I don't know if many of you saw the movie Robot and Frank that was out a couple of years ago. Very interesting movie about, and set in the near future, it was described. And, with the increasing number of aging people, are we going to have enough caregivers for our aging parents and or aging selves, in my case? And in this movie, the adult children of this man, Frank Langella was the actor, basically got him a robot to assist him and take care of his, help with his daily needs. And, it seems a little far-fetched and makes for good movies, but the Japanese are really working hard on this because their demographic situation's even more severe. So, but anyway, I'm not going to project how many robot assistants we're going to have up in the area, or if we're going to have hovercrafts over Duluth and Superior. I'm just going to stick with the human population here. So where are we headed? It's been touched on again a little bit by the students. Again, just focusing on the 7 counties in Wisconsin, there's a rise, basically, the projections are showing a rise in population about 7% or 3 to 4% per decade through 2030. And then beyond that, expecting a slight decline, about 4,000 people from 2030 to 2040, again, about 3% down. So about 7% up for 20 years and about 3% down. Just looking at those individual counties, again, in the area, 3 adjacent counties, and these are the ones furthest east in the REIF area, Ashland, Bayfield, and Iron, are projected to lose population, about 5 to 9%. But this, again, over the whole course of 30 years. And 4 of the counties are expected to gain population. I'm not sure how well you can see it here, but again, what also is projected to happen is that all counties will decline during the 2030s, while the whole region is losing about 3% of the population. And where that's coming from is basically just the change in sort of the age distribution of the population in the area. And this is really sort of the tail of the tape as to how this is going to change. So this is what we call an age pyramid. It's a bit of a misnomer because it doesn't look like a pyramid, does it? But it's a demographic tool for showing the age distribution in 5-year age ranges, youngest people on the bottom, oldest people on the top. I'll just put a box here. There we go, around, so these are the boomers at 2010, myself included in there somewhere, and a lot of people in the audience perhaps. So, and you can see in the way I did this graph, these bars go out almost all the way to the outer edges of my graph as I've set it up. So about 10 to 12,000 in each of these 5-year age groups. So that's accounting for about 50,000 people total. So then we shift ahead 30 years, and this is what the age distribution looks like then. And again, I'll put the box around the age groups where the boomers will be in 2040. You can see a big difference, of course. Mortality will have taken its toll. But you do notice, of course, if you just look straight across, it's sort of the 75 and up bars, that there'd be just a much larger share of the population at those much older ages. But it is also a concern, and this has been alluded to a little bit by other speakers. If you look at the younger ages, 0 to 19 and 20 to 39, you see 30 years out, those are narrower. So you're really getting a pretty, you're getting sort of a top-heavy age distribution. Let's see. Yeah, again, just sort of looking again just at the 65 and over for the total 7 counties. 65 and over are projected to increase by about 18,000 people, or about 76%. And then if we look at what we call the very elderly, 85 and over, not real big numbers right now, and the projection is they'll increase about 4,500, or actually 2.5 times the number of 85 and older people that are currently living in the 7-county area. Let's see. I think students showed a slide very similar to this. I brought my pie charts back and just wanted to sort of point out, so at 2040 going out now, 26 years ahead, that as I believe they pointed out, Douglas County will have about 25% of its population age 65 and over, and that'll be just above the state projected total of 24%. 5 of the counties will have percent 65 and over, 31 to 39%, and then as they point out, Bayfield is projected to have a really large elderly population at 43%. And so when I sort of combine sort of the historic data from 80 through 2010, and then, am I out of time? Just about, okay. The 0 to 17-year-olds have been declining across, if I look across both the historic period and the projected period, declining both in numbers and percents. The working age population sort of peaked in 2010, and we're projecting that to decrease over time. It'll only be 50% of the total population at 2040. And finally, across both the historic time period and the projected period, age 65 plus is projected to grow both percentage-wise and numerically, and hit 31% by 2040. So I've been given the signal for a timeout, so I can jump ahead. I can leave out this last depressing slide. And now Andy will bring the positive rejoinder to my report on Wisconsin.
That slide about the 250% increase in the over 85s makes me think that technology about having cars drive themselves is a really good idea, if you know what I mean. At this time, I would like to introduce Andy Egbert, who is the Assistant Director at the Minnesota State Demographic Center within the State Department of Administration. In this role, Andy oversees the operations of the center in its critical role of analyzing, interpreting, and distributing data from the U.S. Census Bureau, state departments, and other sources, as well as creating population estimates and projections for Minnesota. Please welcome Andy Egbert.
Thank you, Bruce. Good morning, everyone. Great to be with you. I just want to say a fabulous job by the students. Matthew and Eric, I think you could pass as employees of our office. If I ever can't make an engagement, I'd like to call you up and have you be my stand-ins. And I'm going to invite you now to mentally travel back over the lift bridge. Join me on the Minnesota side of the REIF region as we examine the demographics over here. Let's start really big first and just look near term what we've seen in terms of population and also where we're headed. Our office, the Minnesota State Demographic Center, is tasked with producing population estimates in between those decennial years and also projecting into the future. So what you're seeing here and what the students shared are the projections that our office creates. So here you see a portrait of our state, how we changed over the 2000s decade. And we're looking at percentage change here. Areas in red experienced percentage loss. Areas in green experienced percentage gains. And you see that it's a mixed picture across the state. If we zero into the REIF region, we see that 5 counties experienced growth, and we have the absolute or people change there on the right. Carlton led all the counties in gains, and you see Pine, Itasca, and Aiken also experienced population growth, and Cook gained about a couple carloads of people, 8 over the course of the decade. You see Koochiching, St. Louis, and Lake experienced losses over the 2000s. Now, one thing I want to make clear to you is that the way that we are growing in the places that we're growing is actually undergoing a fundamental shift. Since 2000, our non-Hispanic white population has only grown less than 1%, whereas our populations of color, people who self-identify in the census as being a race, one or more other than white, or they identify as Hispanic, those folks defined as population of color here in the graph, they accounted for about 10% growth. And if we put a county lens on it too, we look out across the state, we see that populations of color grew in all the counties in the Minnesota REIF region. In fact, all but 2 counties across the state saw growth in their populations of color. Now, if we look at our white non-Hispanic population, it's a much more mixed picture. And actually, less than half of our counties saw growth in our non-Hispanic white population. Now, on the whole, we're still a predominantly white state. We're far less diverse than the country as a whole. More than 80% of folks identify as being white non-Hispanic. But those places that are growing, much of the growth is due to growth among our populations of color. So that's a shift that is changing as we walk into the future. And increasingly, out to 2030 and beyond, our growth will come from populations of color. Our Asian, Black, and particularly Hispanic, Latino populations are anticipated to grow the most quickly. Now let's zoom in a little bit to the REIF regions. Here I have on the left the 2010 population of the 8 counties in the Minnesota REIF region. And you see that St. Louis is really outsized. It represents about 56% of the region. And then you see our projection horizon out to 2045. Now this is the longest horizon we have for projecting at the county level here. And the numeric or change in people terms that we anticipate for counties, as well as the percentage change. And you see a little bit of a mixed picture that we see that we anticipate will happen for the region. We do believe that Pine, Carlton, and Itasca counties will likely be gainers, with losses in the other 5 counties. Now here's a little bit of a 5-year intervals, 5 years at a time, and you see where each county stair steps down, for example, in St. Louis County later in the projection horizon. Here we have rolled those 8 counties up into the REIF region in Minnesota, and I've expanded the scale here. So you can see, I think as the students touched on, that we do anticipate a peaking population in the region, just under 370,000 in 2025, after which we expect it to fall slightly. Now, what are we anticipating for the state as a whole? How does this figure into the big picture? Well, we do anticipate that our state will continue to grow. And this is our population change. But what do you notice here? We see that we're on a bit of a sledding hill in terms of our population growth, that it's moderating as we look out to the future. And as David talked about, there's really only 3 ingredients in population change, but they keep us really busy with our spreadsheets. They are our births and our deaths, and we net those out, and that's what we call natural increase or decrease. And then migration netted out. And what you see as we move into the future is that we're going to have a fundamental shift in the way that we grow in Minnesota. If you focus on the blue line there, you see that present day and even for the next several years, we're going to have many more of these cute babies running around, that they're going to be greatly in excess of the deaths that we'll encounter. But if you focus on that line, it does actually hit the axis somewhere around 2042. So what that means is if we were to lock the borders, no one got in, no one got out, that's the time at which our state would actually begin contracting in population. Now, we don't anticipate that will actually happen because of the other line, net migration, which has been positive, and we do project that it will remain positive, but that is the hardest part of the equation to predict. Now, one of the things we're asked about often is who's coming here? Who is migrating? I'm here to tell you there are not a lot of people in Arizona dreaming of spending their retirement here. To disabuse you of that notion, comes as quite a surprise to many people that if we break our migration numbers apart, we actually have been experiencing net domestic losses to other states for all of the last 11 years. So not in great numbers, but we are losing more folks to other states than we are gaining. It's only because of our international migrants that we are positive on net migration. So you see, as we move into the future and migration plays a bigger role in how we grow, if we are to grow, that we will have to do a better job of retaining the folks that we have, perhaps attracting more from wherever they come from, particularly if we're going to meet labor force needs. Now, to zoom in on the region, this is a fabulous migration tool out of David's shop, and it just shows which areas in the region have experienced migration that's been positive. And you see that Aiken, Carlton, Pine, and Itasca have positive migration. That's a -4 for Koochiching up there, the negatives floating off by itself. And so you do see that basically the southernmost counties are experiencing in-migration. So that's part of their picture, how they're going to change. This is over the 2000s decade. And we see, similar to the Wisconsin side of the story, that really it's 30-year-olds into the 70-year-olds who are choosing that as a destination. Now, one thing I want to say, perhaps you recall a few slides back, is that Aiken, we're actually not projecting population gains out through 2045, and yet we see on the map, of the migration map, that it is positive for migration. So what's the story there? Aiken is a little bit of a curious case. More than half of Aiken's residents are already over age 50. So you have an interesting scenario where you have it being a destination for people in their later years, but if you look at these population pyramids, incredibly top-heavy in Aiken. So as we work our way out to the future, we don't see the replacement coming up in the bottom years. So to zero in on aging now, I'm so glad that we have this event about aging. We always talk about this regardless of the audience. And like David, I'm not here to pass judgment, but really to give you more characterization of what's going to happen. Here we see our state as a whole in that population pyramid that we demographer types love to use. And again, it's just a visual representation from the youngest to the oldest in 5-year age bands. And you see the boomers there bulging at the about 2/3 of the way up the graph. And the way you can think about the future is imagine this like an escalator. Every 5 years, those of us who are lucky enough get to occupy the next bar, right? We have births coming in at the bottom, We have mortality throughout, but clustered at the top. And like I said, we all hope to occupy the next bar with a little bit of migration in the background. But what I'm here to tell you is that even though the boomers may not look that much greater than the generations that follow them, the most relevant comparison on this map is not from the boomers to those that come behind them, but it's really an upward comparison. And the boomers are larger than any generation that's preceded them in the history of our state or our country. Let me just characterize this a little bit for you. This is showing the change in the older adult population. I'm just using that term to refer to 65 plus. This is going back to the 50s, and in thousands, we had roughly between 50 and 90,000 people aging into that 65 plus category in each of those decades. You see it varies a little bit. Well, before we see the close of the decade that we are in presently, we are going to add 285,000 additional older adults. By the time we get to the close of the 2020s, as the younger boomers occupy that group, we will have 335,000 additional older adults. We have not ever been here before. One way to think about this, that bar in the 2010s is greater than what we have experienced in the last 4 decades put together, if you were to sum those figures. What we're going to experience in the 2020s is equivalent to more than the 5 decades that preceded this one. So one way to think about population aging is that we're about to encounter roughly 9 decades of population change in 2 because of the size of the boomer generation. So we don't quite have a roadmap. The usual patterns of how we've done things, how we've prepared our communities, are not going to serve us simply because the volume is going to be so different. A couple different ways to think on this. Between 2010 and 2030 in numbers, our older adult population will double. And you see as we get to 2030 there, then we start filling up the 75 to 84 group, and the 85 plus group grows and swells to a place where we have never been before as our state. By the time we get to 2030, more than 1 in 5 Minnesotans will be an older adult. And again, similarly, more will occupy all of those later age groups. Now this is unique too. Something singular where we have never been in the past. Somewhere around 2020, which used to sound so futuristic and now is only a handful of years away, we are going to have our 65 plus group become larger. They will eclipse the K-12 school population. Folks, we have never been here before. We've never had this reversal. And so as you see there in the boomers, we're at that kind of steep jumping off point there with the blue line. And very quickly, that group occupies, they're quite a bit bigger than the K-12. Now, in terms of the public dollar and how we spend our resources, we spend a lot of money on K-12 education and health services for the older population. So we'll have some tough questions to answer as we see this reversal. Labor force. Our labor force participation, we project, will reach a trough in the early 2020s at about 0.1%. As we think about these groups in relation to one another, just in absolute numbers, the 25 to 64-year-olds is going to dip. We're going to have 100,000 fewer of them across the state as the Gen Xers who follow the boomers are so much smaller. So we're going to need everyone. It's going to be an all-hands-on-deck situation in terms of the labor force. Now, to focus in on the region again here, you see a very similar thing. We see a decline in that top line of about 30,000 of the 25 to 64-year-olds, kind of our prime working years. We're just going to have 30,000 fewer people to go around. Most of those folks are joining the 65 to 85 line there in purple, and the 85 plus line. Now on our website, you can pull up these population pyramids if you didn't get enough of this today, of these graphs. I'm just going to share with you St. Louis County, what we see it looking like arrayed from youngest to oldest. And this is what St. Louis County, we imagine, will look like next year. And you see there in the 15 to 24-year-olds, a huge bulge due to the educational institutions here. But fast forward, walk forward in time with me. Here we are in 11 years. Here we are in 21 years. Look at those bars in the late 70s to early 80s. With the exception of the college-age population, they are longer than any other bar. So you're statistically more likely to meet an 80-year-old in 20 years in St. Louis County than anyone else, short of the college-age population. Here we are in 31 years, and we almost have an upside-down pyramid. So, to sum up, a lot of implications to this data. We know that population aging is changing many things. We know that folks as they're aging, they're doing it differently. They're remaining in the workforce longer. They report better health. Right now, the life expectancy of someone age 65 is 20 years in Minnesota, 16 of them in very good health. However, as we walk into the future, we see a lot of challenges too. We are going to need to prepare for them, and I hope what I've shown you will give you license to prepare for them, because our usual patterns of preparing are not going to serve us. We know that we have rising rates of disability as we age, and we also know that we're going to have these labor force concerns. So really, to sum up, what will population aging mean for the region and for the state? We know that older adults, they're drawing down their savings. They're less likely to be spending the way we do at our peak, say in our late 40s. We know that we're going to see slowing labor force growth. This is going to be a bit of an all-hands-on-deck scenario. We're going to have to do our best to develop, to retain, and to attract the workers. I heard one of the students say that 25% of businesses report a challenge with finding skilled workers. We imagine this will only intensify. We need to prepare the infrastructure, and I mean that in the broadest sense of the word. What are we going to do for caregiving, for health, as health and disability challenges inevitably mount? We don't like to think about it happening to ourselves or our parents or our neighbors, but we know that the challenges will increase. Having fewer workers relative to older adults, it really puts a premium on those workers. We can't leave any of them behind. We need them all. I'm very heartened when I see the young people up here today. It was a tough act to follow. They're really, really fabulous. And finally, I will just say, the past will not necessarily be our guide, because we're at a point that we haven't been at in our state's history. And this is happening across the U.S. It's happening in most developed countries where we have population aging unlike anything we have ever seen before. So I think what's heartening is that we have license to do things differently, to be creative, to innovate in terms of how we're going to meet needs, both in terms of labor force concerns and also responding to the needs and capturing the talents of our older adults as they step out of the workforce. With that, I will turn it back over to Bruce, and I welcome your questions.
Okay, first question. Oops. Did the first presentation take into account an increase in people moving into the area over the next 25 years to replace the labor force that is retiring? Also, the increase in demand for labor in healthcare due to the aging population. People will move to the region if there is a high demand for labor.
Is my mic on? Okay. Yeah, it's an interesting thing to understand about, at least the way I do projections. I think it's a similar model, although Andy can comment on it. In doing population projections, we do what's called a baseline projection. And this is taking, basically to sort of sum it up, it is, in sort of a shortest phrase I can think of is sort of, if past patterns hold true. Now, as a person who does projections, I'm happy to be proven wrong. And right, these are issues. all we have to kind of operate on is historic patterns. And a lot of things may change just, as the population, as there's more and more of a concentration of older people, will more medical clinics open in the area, and maybe they'll stay longer in the area. And again, those medical clinics would then draw, younger staff. So anyway, the projections, they do look rather dark. But again, this is, the situation on the ground can produce different results.
Just a similar question. It appears the projections are based on status quo. What impact would changes in the industrial and other business sectors have on the region?
Do you want to take that one?
Sure. Well, as David said in his presentation, and as I hope to say in mine, projections is tricky business. Patterns of birth and death do not change very dramatically. They're fairly stable over time. So as we move into a future where migration is the bigger component of change, that does introduce more variability, right? So we can think a short list, what sort of things drive migration. Internationally and domestically, there are a lot of push and pull factors, and obviously the local economic context is significant. In small communities, the closing or opening of a plant can have significant effect. And it's very hard to predict. Obviously, changes in federal immigration policy may change our projections internationally. Refugee arrivals, we have a lot of refugees in our state with our voluntary networks to receive them. So I don't want to overstate our confidence on these, but obviously the economic picture plays a big role.
Next question. Do Duluth's demographics vary from St. Louis counties?
I think that's me. I was hoping I'd get this question. I looked up the answer. So this is my plant. Thank you. No. No, well, obviously that's of great interest. St. Louis is such a curious county, right? It spans so much geographic territory, and then Duluth is a strong center of our state. If you recall, over the 2000s decade, Duluth lost on net, St. Louis County lost on net about 300 people, and only about 50 of those were losses in Duluth. So most of that loss was in the greater balance of the county. And as we project out to the future, moderate losses projected for both. But the balance of it is coming from outside of the Duluth area.
Okay. Now this is after 2025. Is the population loss locally primarily due to dramatic reductions or changes in the mining industry?
I think what you see happening in 2025 is the reversal of that scenario. Death's kind of getting the upper hand, where we don't have significant migration to think about. Really, it's kind of a waiting game between the births and the deaths. And as the boomers enter those years where we have more mortality, that's when we're starting to see declining populations. So I think that is part of the picture. But also the local economic context drives the recent patterns of population change, which then builds into our projections. So it's part of it.
Have we tracked weather patterns to migration patterns over the last 10 to 20 years?
Have you, David?
Well, I actually am starting to get involved in looking at global climate change and how that might impact population flows. Obviously, a lot of the focus so far has been in coastal areas, but it's kind of like climate scientists know how to do climate, but they really don't know anything about population. So they're actually now starting to talk to people who look at future populations. So I would say it's still sort of an evolving field of study. And yeah, certainly as climate change begins to affect even the upper Midwest, will that have some impact? Will fewer, or it could have sort of reverse impact, will fewer older people be migrating to Texas and Arizona because it's just too darn hot? even in the winter. So that's, again, one of the sort of these long view issues that people are really just starting to look at, and more research will be coming out on that in the next 5 to 10 years.
If I could add one thing to that. Some of you may know Tom Gillespie was a long-serving state demographer. One of his parting comments to our office as he retired was, keep your eye on water. And what he meant by that is that as we move into the future, water resources are going to become really critical. In areas in the southwest part of the United States that have seen a lot of population growth, their water resources are going to, in many ways, kind of, I don't want to say strangle, but dry up, yes, well said. But it's certainly going to crimp population growth, and it's going to be a challenge for industry down there. And so we are very well positioned in terms of water resources, which I think bodes well for us moving into the decades to come.
And regarding Cook and Lake County population declining, won't access to high-speed internet draw new residents who can work anywhere to that area to replace deaths?
That's a great question, and we're often posed that. We look at long-standing trends in terms of population change, but we're at a unique point in history, I would say, where the resources that are becoming available in terms of the knowledge economy, where people can work, people can work from anywhere now, increasingly with broadband expansion. And so I think that's one thing that we're really keeping our eye on. A lot of people who lived in more metropolitan areas report that they went to rural areas in Minnesota because of the amenities. And people who migrate the other direction typically say they do so for jobs. So as they have the ability to have the amenities and still do their job, will we see a greater population hold or even growth in those areas? I think it's something to watch. Mm-hmm.
More here. Other than gerontology and health services, where are the greatest opportunities for job expansion, including entrepreneurial businesses?
I'd say just about everywhere. It's as I tried to show, and Andy showed through her slides and the students as well. The inevitable aging process is really happening across the entire region. Even in St. Louis and Douglas counties, okay, it won't be quite as large a percentage, but numerically, it's still going to be quite a bit of growth, that change. And again, it's going to be, not just obviously to this region or our two states, but the country as a whole. There'll be just an incredible, if you look at it sort of from an opportunity perspective, like as I showed with Del Webb communities and, building their sun cities, there are definitely just expansion possibilities everywhere.
One more real good one here. What are the dynamics of labor force participation rate for male and female in the region?
Well, I can speak to the Minnesota side. A lot of, we published a report that looked at the long-run trends in labor force participation. You had through the 70s and 80s this huge entrance of women into the labor force. Women in Minnesota participate, are men as well, but in such high numbers. But in many ways, we've, I think, wrung as much out of that trend as we will see. And now I think we get to the point where, as we're thinking about labor shortages, we are going to have to work with groups that are maybe have more challenges to labor force participation if we're going to kind of have this all hands on deck scenario.
Okay.
Conclude the questions. There was one final question which is really good, which feeds right into my last little bit of information here. It is there a place or website access to today's presentation slides? Yes, there is. And please note, if you look around in the, perhaps on your tables or at the registration tables, an opportunity to give us your authority to call for future surveys. It's really important. It takes less than 5 minutes to help our students do their research for consumer confidence and such. So if you would, please fill one of these out if you haven't, and open yourself up to a short survey, and drop them on the desk or the table in the back so we can collect them and have your email address. And as of noon today, we will be making all of the slides available on our website, and we will send out a notification on that. So by noon, you can see all the slides, the entire presentation on our website. Please help us with this. It's always challenging for the students to make lots of calls and to get good data, and the more people that we hear from, the better. I would also like to call attention to all of the faculty and all of the student researchers that participated in the program today. So we have a slide for that. Go back or? There, it's the second to last. There we have it. These are the folks that put a lot of time and effort in, both providing leadership, and so I'd like all of the student researchers and professors to stand up for a round of applause. Thank you. Don't forget to stop by the job resources booths as you exit today. Our next REIF breakfast is March 31st, and our topic will be housing in the region. Thank you again for coming, and we hope to see you and more of your friends at the next REIF breakfast on March 31st. Thank you.